Hello. Today we are going to do the prologue to Henry V by William Shakespeare. But before we do this this prologue, um, there are a few things I need to explain. So, Henry V, who was he? Henry V, he was a very famous king. He was the King of England from 1413 until his death in 1422. And though he ruled for a very short period of time, he he has outstanding military successes booked to his name. And he fought during the Hundred Years' Wars against France. During that time, he made England one of the strongest military powers in Europe. So he was really one of the greatest warrior kings of medieval England, really famous. And so famous that Shakespeare, he wrote a play based on his life. Now, coming to the play that Shakespeare wrote on Henry V, on the life of Henry V, you must remember that Shakespearean plays were divided, or rather, they are divided into five parts or five acts. And in Henry V, you'd also see that the entire play is divided into five acts, and each act opens up with a prologue, a kind of an a prologue is as a kind of a is a kind of a speech that a person gives, and it usually is the part that comes at the beginning of a play, and it often gives information about the events that have happened before the time when the play begins. So that's the function of a prologue. And this is the prologue to King Henry V. And it is spoken by a single character who's called the chorus. And the chorus um, opens each of the play's five acts with a speech. And this, what you see before you, is the speech that opens Act 1. So we'll start immediately. So the chorus, you must imagine that a Shakespearean stage, the Globe Theatre where Shakespeare staged his plays. And what you can see in this picture is people have all crowded up, around the stage to watch the play. They had no television or Netflix or modern day theaters. So this was a typical Shakespearean theater. They just some people sat, those who had more money, they could afford a seat, and the rest of the people who could not afford a seat, they just stood around the stage and watched the play. So the chorus, he would come up to the stage just like you see in the picture, and he would announce what they were about to watch. And he would tell them, well, you know what, you're going to watch a story, and this is going to include huge fields and grand battles and fighting kings. And the chorus tells the people, he says, listen, you will have to use your imagination to make the story come to life, because we cannot have everybody on the stage. We cannot have thousands of people on the stage. So you have to use your imagination to make the story come to life. He tells the audience that they must imagine that the wooden stage is actually the fields of France. And he says all the actors that appear on the stage, that they must imagine that they are actually huge armies that fight to death in those fields. So let's do the poem, the prologue, line wise. So the chorus enters and he says, oh, for a muse of fire that would ascend the brightest heaven of invention. So he says, I wish. Muse was a source of artistic inspiration. So he says, I wish that a goddess made out of fire leads me to the greatest heights of imagination. A kingdom for a stage, princes to act, and monarchs to behold the swelling scene. And he says, I wish I had a kingdom to use as a stage, princes to act the play, and monarchs or kings to watch the glorious show. Then should the warlike Harry or Henry, like himself, assume the port of Mars and at his heels, leashed in like hounds, should famine, sword, and fire crouch for employment. He says, when I have this, then the great fighter Henry would look like himself, or rather, he would look like the god of war, Mars. And starvation, violence, and fire would follow him on leashes, just like dogs waiting for his instructions. But pardon, gentles all, the flat, unraised spirits that had dared on this unworthy scaffold to bring forth so great an object. He says, forgive me, gentlemen. The ordinary people who dare to act out such a great subject matter on this unworthy stage, forgive them, he says. Because he says, can this cockpit hold the vasty fields of France? He calls the stage a cockpit, a cockfighting ring. He says, can this stage, which is the size of a cockfighting ring, hold the huge fields of France? Or maybe cram within this wooden O the very casks that did affright the air at Agincourt. So he says, the Globe Theatre was also called the Wooden O, and this was because the wooden building materials which were used to build the theatre, they looked circular in shape from a distance, so it was called the Wooden O. And he says, or can we stuff the casques or the helmets that terrified even the air itself at the Battle of Agincourt into this Wooden O? We'll not be able to even fit those many helmets here on this stage. Oh, pardon, since a crooked figure may attest in little place a million, and let us ciphers to this great account on your imaginary forces work. So he says, well, he says, oh, forgive us. Since he says, since when you're writing something, you can abbreviate a million into a little squiggle, into a little word. He says, then in a similar manner, let us zeros in this huge bank account, work on your imagination. He says, let us work in your imagination. Suppose within the girdles of these walls are now confined two mighty monarchies whose high, upreared, and abutting fronts the perilous narrow ocean parts asunder. He says, now, he says, let's pretend, okay? Let's pretend that there are two powerful kings or monarchies shut into these walls, okay? And they are threatening each other, they're threatening violence to each other. But he says, you must imagine that they are separated by a dangerous, narrow ocean. Piece out our imperfections with your thoughts. Into 1,000 parts, divide one man. So he says, well, make up for what our version lacks. He says, we cannot show you everything, but you can make up for it by filling in the rest with your own thoughts, with your own imagination. He says, pretend that one man on the stage stands for 1,000, so that you might have, he says, and make imaginary puissance, he says, and so that you have a whole imaginary army. So he says you have to use your imagination and think that one man on the stage represents an entire army. Think when we talk of horses that you see them printing their proud hooves in the receiving earth. He says, when we talk about horses, pretend that you can see them stamping their proud hooves into the soft earth. For 'tis your thoughts that now must deck our kings, carry them here and there. He says, because now your minds, he says, have to dress our kings, have to carry them here and there. All right, jumping o'er times, turning the accomplishment of many years into an hourglass. So he says, you must, your minds have to dress our kings, carry them here and there, and jump forward in time and imagine that several years have passed within an hour. Yeah, into an hourglass. For the which supply, admit me the chorus, or admit me chorus to this history. He says, allow me to help you. Let me narrate this story. I'm the chorus, I'm going to narrate the story. Who prologue like, just like a prologue in a book, your humble patience pray. I ask you for your patience to patiently hear our play. and also to judge it kindly, also to um, judge it kindly. I hope you like it, and that if we make any mistakes on the stage, I hope you will not judge us harshly.